All right, what's going on there, fellas? We're back with another Top Something or Other Tuesdays. Today, we are going to talk about my top 5 exercises or general movement categories to enhance all caps. Because apparently that works. Every single video I've put the all caps on has gotten like substantially above my average views. I was not expecting that to work, but I'm not complaining. So top 5 exercises to enhance the results of your basic strength training, whether that basic strength training falls into the category of powerlifting or more just training for overall strength, not any one sport in particular. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of things that does well in these general broader senses of training, and there's going to be some areas that are neglected. And that's a similar topic that a bunch of people asked for, was like top 5 neglected muscles or neglected areas when kind of participating in basic strength training. So that's all kind of wrapped up into one. I texted Paris. I said, hey, pick a top something or other Tuesday. This was his pick. So we're going to get into my top 5. So the first thing that we want to get on the table is, what is basic strength training? Usually when we're talking basic strength training, we're kind of talking 4, debatably 5 general categories of movement. We have squat pattern work, we have hinge pattern work, we have upper body pushing, and we have upper body pulling. These things can be done in different planes, different loading positions, right? Front squat, back squat, squat pattern machine, RDL, deadlift, back extension. There's a bunch of different exercises that fit into these general categories, but we're looking to improve performance metrics in these 4 categories. Some people would argue that carrying weight is a 5th category that doesn't really concretely fit into any of those, has its own unique benefits, and thus could be like the 5th pillar of strength training. So 4 to 5 key pillars. Let's say we are working to our upper capacities. We're doing well-selected movements for our own body, for our own goals in each of these groups. So maybe if someone's a little bit more kind of strength and hypertrophy oriented, something like a hack squat probably merits a place in that squat pattern movement, something where we're not limited by our balance, we're not limited by skill quite as much, and we're not limited by our back. We are truly working to the upper limits of our legs. Might be a very good idea from a hypertrophy perspective, yada, yada, yada. So we're filling these different exercise slots differently from person to person, but let's say we are filling them with well-selected exercises to adequate volumes to be driving this forward progression in whatever rep range we deem relevant for that period of time. We're probably going to want to rotate those rep ranges with time to see sustained progress and periodize things a little bit once we kind of outgrow sticking to a static rep range. But let's say we're doing all of those things well. What do these 4 to 5 things kind of neglect? What can we fill in to further bolster our results and make ourselves a more well-rounded strength athlete? Even if we don't compete in anything, I think thinking of yourself as a strength athlete is a good idea. I think the connotations that come in mind in terms of your lifestyle whenever possible, even if you aren't competitive, I think athlete evokes kind of the right images in most people's mind for what they should be doing, how they should be living. They should be going to bed early. They should be keeping in decent shape, because what kind of athlete is in terrible shape? I digress. Let's get into the top 5. So the first thing that we probably want to tack on there onto our basic strength training routine is going to be some kind of knee flexion work, whether that be a glute ham raise, whether that be a hamstring curl, whether that be a banded hamstring curl, whether that be a Nordic. Depending on if we're in a home gym, we might be looking at like like rigging up a Nordic. Maybe we might be looking at doing like lying banded curls in a home gym. Maybe eventually we want to save up for something like a glute ham raise, because that opens up a couple of different exercise options. So it's probably a good use of space for most. I would say between GHD sit-ups, back extensions, and glute ham raises, all being some good nuts and bolts training. I think that for most people, if they've got the room, that's something they might want to look to buy eventually. But if we don't have that, we can easily kind of put some weights on a bar, put the bar down low, and do some assisted Nordics. But let's say, why would we be doing knee flexion? Well, one, I think you guys have already probably heard me bring this up. If you're a regular on the channel, the short head of the hamstring does not tie across the hip. It is not biarticular. It just crosses the knee joint, which means that if all of your hamstring work is going to be hip hinging with RDLs and back extensions, we are going to be severely neglecting that specific head of the hamstring. You could say, well, maybe that doesn't propose a huge injury risk, right? If our preparation is specific, right? If we're getting ready to deadlift and we do adequate volumes, intensities, and frequencies of deadlifting, we should be safe for a heavy deadlift. And I would say, yeah, that's true. But when we're doing more varied tasks like sprinting, where, yeah, we are going to be challenging our knee flexion a little bit extra, I do think it's good insurance. And that was one of the first exercises that kind of had some evidence to support, or Nordics were, to support that they reduce injury risk, right? There was some studies that were like, oh, if you do Nordics, it seems like we have lower rates of hamstring strains when sprinting. Now, is that unique to the Nordic? No, it's loading and exercising, increasing its tissue tolerance probably is going to make that muscle more resilient. There's nothing inherently magical to a Nordic, which I always thought was really funny. You see strength and conditioning programs insistent that their athletes are doing Nordics. And it's like, well, could we get the same benefit from a glute ham raise? Yeah, probably. Could we get a lot of the same benefits from a hamstring curl with better standardization of movement and better load control? Probably. Is a Nordic a great motion? Yeah, absolutely. But the other reason we want to do these, speculation of reduction of injury risk aside, the fact that it's going to make your hamstrings look bigger aside, maybe better perform, is the fact that it can probably bolster our performance. We're able to run up a bunch of extra hamstring volume because, yes, it hits the short head of the hamstring, where hip hinging doesn't, but it also hits the long head of the hamstring, right? It lets us run up a bunch of hamstring volume without being limited by our lower back like we would on any hip hinging movement. Even a back extension, we're often going to be limited by our lower back. An RDL, going to be limited by the lower back. Deadlift, often going to be limited by that trunk stability, right? So just like how I am a big proponent for squat pattern work where we're making our back not the limiting factor, kind of the same thing could be said of the hamstring curl. Once we've kind of filled up however much our low back can handle in terms of hip hinging, we can run up a bunch more volume to maximally strengthen and maximally hypertrophy the hamstring by doing something focused more at the knee joint and sparing on the low back, such as all of these knee flexion based work. And hamstrings are very important. The fact that they contribute very heavily to picking up heavy objects and sprinting, which I consider to be two of the most basic human functions that's cool to be good at. I would say take your hamstring training seriously. Don't leave this kind of low-hanging fruit out there. Make sure you collect it. Make sure your program has sets of knee flexion, that you're really putting in effort. It's not just a mailed-in 3x8 to 12. We're actually pushing to see gradual performance increases in our total volume, in our rep PRs, and it's going to make you better at a hell of a lot of things, and it's going to make you a more well-rounded strength athlete. So number two, we're not going to go on about this too much because I've made plenty of stuff on the channel about it already. But in addition to our general squat pattern movements, I like to see some of that be unilateral, whether that be a split squat, whether that be a walking lunge, whether that be a single leg press. Those are probably the three most common ones that I'll use. There's a bunch more that are really good. Something like a step up, a lateral step up, a Cossack squat. There's tons of squat pattern unilateral movements that are all really good. And I just like to see those in there. I think challenging that unilateral stability often makes someone a more proficient squatter because a squat is a lot more athletic than something like a bench press. So the fact that, oh, well, the split squat's limited by balance. Well, your squat might also be limited by balance. I think getting more generally athletic and having better balance to be able to express your force is usually a net positive. I would say it's a benefit of the exercise, not a drawback. Getting better at moving your body through space with something like walking lunges, as well as all of these unique benefits to like the musculature that making it unilateral kind of challenges, right? Maybe we're always squatting from this position where we're driving our knees out really far. It might be good to challenge the quad in more of a linear, straight position like we would be with a single leg movement, right? So I think there's a ton of benefits to it. Again, I think it's going to make you stronger in your squats. It's going to make you stronger at jumping. It's going to make you stronger at running, and all around it can make you a better strength athlete. And I think it's absolutely worth making sure, hey, we're doing 5 sets of squats 2 times a week. Let's throw in 2 sets of split squats as well and make sure those are really quality. We want to first focus on making sure we're taking these supplemental movements and applying adequate intensity to them and making sure they're not junk volume, they're true hard working sets. We're getting skillful at these key supplemental movements, and then we can start titrating up the amount. Because they're novel, you're going to get sick adaptation from them right off the bat without having to do a ton of volume, just by kind of mastering the movement. And then you'll be, okay, well, I can recover from 2 really hard sets. But let's start low from a base of quality and then build quantity, rather than start with 5 sets, 8 sets across the week, and they're kind of junk, and we have to build quantity. We have to build quality. Don't start from a high quantity and build quality. I would rather see someone start with the quality on point and then build the number of quality sets and build up that quantity. Wow, that was a bit of a tongue twister for me. Now, the third thing I would like to see on top of this basic strength training program is direct midsection work, core work, if you will. I know that people get really pedantic about the word core or abs or midsection or whatever the hell. We're just going to say core work. I've kind of been back and forth with my thoughts over this over a long time. I've always seen benefit to it, and I've always kind of understood conceptually why that isn't necessary, right? Whatever amount of core strength is going to be beneficial to the squat and deadlift will presumably be built by the squat and deadlift. And maybe maximal strength of the core isn't this great predictor of really anything. But I do find that when I do extra direct work for my midsection and I kind of work to hypertrophy that area, I have a better mind-muscle connection with my midsection, which leads to a higher quality of brace, which is a tremendous benefit. And then I think that doing that extra work, improving the brace, kind of improving my ability to create tightness through my midsection, better lets me express the strength I build in my limbs across a wide variety of tasks, whether that's putting something heavy over my head, whether that's carrying something heavy, whether it's picking up something heavy. Being able to transfer that force through the midline is a very important task, and I think it merits a little bit of extra work. Now, what is the physical qualities we're looking for at the midsection? I don't know if I've ever believed that maximal strength of the midsection is really all that important. What I've kind of found is it's some combination of hypertrophy of the midsection that kind of leads to a better brace quality and a better connection with the core. And it's also the kind of quality of muscular endurance. So if we can build muscular endurance in the muscles that surround our spine, we're presumably going to be able to do more and more work. So having exercises in there that are almost for building work capacity of the midsection, I find has really bolstered my ability to do more and more effective sets of deadlifting and squatting, and that's translated to being able to carry heavier stuff. It's done a lot of good stuff for me. So what motions do I like to see? I like to see, you could do sit-ups with your feet tucked under something, or GHD sit-ups, hanging leg raises, planks, suitcase carries, side planks, and Russian twists. I would say that's kind of my favorite ones. It's like my big six per se. So that's something I like to see in there. And I really think about, okay, well, what am I doing this for? It's not to be as strong at a sit-up as possible. It's not to be as strong at a side plank as possible. It's to develop more and more work capacity of my midsection. And when I started viewing it through that lens, I really started to reap the rewards of this bit of extra work when I viewed it as more capacity work than anything else. Now, obviously, hypertrophy is going to be a cool little side effect of that, but that's kind of how I think about it. Now, number 4 on the kind of list of things that I think are going to supplement your training very effectively is going to be direct, like upper back work, right? Because, depending on who you ask, upper back might be lats. Depending on who you ask, upper back might be things north of the lats. So we're going to go more north of the lats. I think if we're doing our upper body pulling, we're doing kind of the fundamentals. Let's say we're doing a barbell row, maybe we're doing a dumbbell row, and we're doing some pull-ups. I think we're going to have pretty darn developed and strong lats. What I like to see is some supplemental work on top of that for the things kind of above that. So a lot of people kind of coin a lot of these exercises shoulder stability work because, again, these are muscles that are acting kind of on our scaps, whether they're stabilizing them, whether they're the muscles that contribute to the upward rotation. And these things are going to make us have a lot better control of weights, especially in an overhead position. I think, lack of concrete peer-reviewed evidence here, but I speculate that having these muscles strong is very helpful for maintaining long-term shoulder health. That's just my opinion. And that's why a lot of people will call these like shoulder stability exercises. And I think they merit a place on the sessions where we're tasking our pressing. Let's say we're doing our horizontal and our vertical pressing, maybe some dips, maybe some incline. We got all these different planes of pressing. I like to see a little bit of work for kind of the rear delt and upper back on top of that. My favorite exercises to fill this spot are something like Powell raises. You're always going to hear me shill for those because I've gotten a tremendous amount of benefits to the health of my shoulders just from regularly trying to keep my Powell raises for 3 sets of 8 to 12 strong. Face pulls, IYT raises, bent over rear delt flies, though they get a bit of a bad rap, I think are a very effective exercise. A wider stance row where we're pulling much higher towards the chest and biasing towards the upper back can also be very good here. I think even things like lateral raises, things like upright rows are all things that we're kind of, yes, they're for the delts and they're just as much for the upper back as they are the delts. And if we can kind of build a lot of strength in a lot of planes of movement for this upper back musculature, I find the scaps tend to move a lot better. The shoulder health tends to be better. People's lockout position tends to be better if you're someone who's concerned with putting a lot of weight over your head. And I think that, again, working hard on a few sets of a few of these is going to be a very good long-term investment. You might not see direct carryover right off the bat, right? Because we're probably going to see direct carryover from doing either well-selected variations or more of those core things. If we want something to carry over to our hinging, it's probably going to be another hinge. It's going to be a well-selected variation, or it's going to be doing just more hinging in general. If we want to see carryover to our squat, we're probably going to need to do more squat pattern work. Things outside of a fundamental squat pattern are not likely to see direct carryover, but there are certain things we can do that might kind of potentiate more success in our squat pattern work in future training cycles. Something like, let's say, a leg extension. We're probably not going to see our squat shoot up because we added in leg extensions. But if week after week after week, we're putting in 4 sets of leg extensions and we're hypertrophying our quads, we're then going to be able to express that later with more squat training. So it's kind of building the potential for the squat training to go better next training cycle than it is looking for carryover. And I kind of view the upper back and the rear delt stuff that way. I don't think it's going to carry over unless it's woefully underprepared right now, in which case, if your overhead positioning is terrible and you build up these muscles, it might actually carry over. But for the most part, it's just potentiating your actual vertical pressing to go better and better and be able to handle more and more of it. And that's what's going to carry over. So it's kind of like a secondhand benefit, but it's very worthwhile in my opinion. Now to wrap this one up, I'm not going to spend too long on this one because this is a sheather training video. It wouldn't be a sheather training video if I didn't shill for direct tricep work after you're pressing, but yada, yada, yada. My standard talking point is once we're done overhead pressing, once we're done bench pressing, the reason we can't do any more productive vertical and horizontal pressing work is usually the chest and the shoulders are fatigued, but the triceps are not at their maximum recoverable volume yet. So doing direct tricep work, tricep isolation work to fill up the remainder of that work that they can handle usually makes you a better presser in the long term. So standard plug for direct tricep work on top of this standard strength training. Yeah, I'm not going to harp on that one too much. I know that's kind of my thing. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you as always.